Gabriel, but I'm a professor of counselling and mental health, and have worked in the mental health field for decades. I've got one slide that I want to show as a kind of pivot around which I want to share some things, and also just a couple of things, kind of heads up, one external and one internal. So the external one is two things actually. The consultation closed on Monday for open access outputs. So as everybody's probably aware, there's a real push within the university sector to have publications in journals and in textbooks, but I'll stick with journals, in journals which offer open access. However, the open access comes with a price, so someone somewhere has to pay a fee, so an article processing fee. So that consultation on the open access outputs has just closed. So watch this space for a report back on that, because I think it'd be really interesting to see. Just bear with me. Here we are. I'm just going to share my screen so you can have a look at some of what they were looking at. Okay. So interestingly, in they're comparing what was happening with journal articles, for example, in 2021 and the proposal for 2029. So this is a really, really useful document just to have a look at if you're not familiar with what's classed as an output. So on this paper, they're talking about, I'll whiz through and I'll come back so that you don't get giddy, but journal articles, and then long form outputs, so things like monographs, book chapters, edited books, and other scholarly outputs. So that's the kind of key areas that they're looking at. So Alison, hopefully this time round, our book chapters and our books may be treated differently.
That would be great.
It would be really good. If people don't have access to this document or haven't seen it, please email me separately and I'll send you the link or the document itself. But I'm telling you this deliberately because REF are looking at outputs, and obviously there's a heavy emphasis on things being open access. Now, when we go right back to say you've got some funding or you're doing a project which is unfunded and you're coming to your pulling together your outcomes and outputs into the format of, for example, a journal article. Ideally, you'll be looking for the highest possible quality of journal, and that quality assessment is made by the citations that the journal has under its kind of belt, so to speak. So that affects its quality rating. So the highest rated journals sit within something called quartile 1, and there are different quartiles. And I do know that in York St John, there's encouragement, not terrible pressure, but encouragement to be thinking about your outcomes from your research-related work and thinking about where that output in the format of a chapter or a book or a journal article, where it's going and the quality of the platform where you want to place it, putting aside peer review and all that other stuff that goes on. So it'll be interesting for you to have a look at this document, to look at the different kinds of aspects of journal articles and long form outputs. So I'll just come off that screen so you're not staring at that. Remove that. Bear with me. I'm just going to stop sharing for 1 second. That's it. Okay, share again. Bear with me.
While you're doing that, I've just put a link in the chat to a website where you can type in the name of the journal that you're interested in, and then it'll give you all the
Excellent.
metrics for that journal, including what its Q rating has been for the last few years and is currently. So some journals might actually fall into several category of fields. So you may see that it's got a Q rating in one area that's slightly different to another. And it's done in a kind of traffic light sort of system. So you'll kind of sort of see things given like colors, like sort of green and orange and things. So I find that really useful if I want if I'm thinking between several journals and I'm trying to decide where to publish. That will be one of the things I look at, including things like their open access policy. Is that journal part of the York St John sort of read and publish open access contracts, because that's enabled some of us to publish open access. I might also look to see if it's a journal where you can publish open access, but there's also a kind of more normal route to publication in case we don't have the funding for an article processing fee.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Alison. Anything that Alison's mentioned there, we've got copies of the updated read and publish policy or approach at York St John. So if anyone thinks after this call, gosh, I need to get my hands on that, just contact us and we'll make sure you've got the information. Okay, so I'm back to share now. I just want to share a slide for us to look at while I'm saying a little bit more. So I've mentioned the open access outputs consultation has ended. So it's like watch this space, we'll see what finally comes out. REF also, this time round, I think they've really listened to some of the feedback from the sector and others on the whole REF activity and process. So they, for a little while now, have been actively recruiting to 2 new key panels. And one is around people and diversity, and the other is around research and diversity, and creating opportunities to look at a much broader spectrum, for example, of what represents research. So that feels like a move that's particularly welcomed by colleagues that aren't in particular scientific disciplines, but are in more human related, like some of the mental health practitioners, counsellors, occupational therapists, for example. They're just a few, and I don't want to offend anyone that I've excluded. It's just giving examples. But there are signs that REF is looking at what constitutes knowledge, what constitutes the generation of new information that's of value to a particular discipline. So it would be really interesting to see what comes out of those 2 panels. And then internally within York St John, something went out to school research leads recently about the read and publish policy at York St John. So it's definitely worth having a look at that. And if you haven't seen it, go to your school research lead and they'll be able to give you sight of that. So it's about, just as Alison was really helpfully conveying, when you're thinking about you've got an output that you want to put out there somewhere, that you think about what do I need to look at? What do I need to read? And who do I need to speak to? And what I would say in terms of who you need to speak to, I would definitely be engaging with the colleagues that work with our institutional repository. So that's Megan and Ruth. And
I've just put I've put their email address, Ray at York St John, up in the chat, and also links to the parts of the university website that are the read and publish agreement. But also the subject librarians are happy to offer you support around looking at where you might publish your research. So I've also given you a link to that part of the library website, which is called Publishing Your Research.
Excellent. Thanks, Alison. So internally, someone called Megan Kildington, who works in the connects into the institutional repository, I know from a recent conversation with her that we're just about to tip over into a new kind of accounting period for support for open access for papers that academics wish to submit to a journal. And I would encourage you, if you are looking at publication, even before you get, as you're getting kind of ready to submit, check with Megan Kilvington in particular, just to look at how likely is your request for open access to be supported, because one of the challenging things is the demand for support to publish open access might outstrip the resources that the institution has to support that. So think really carefully, and if you're not sure about this, you can talk to your school research lead, you could talk to myself or Alison or Owen from the unit, or we can signpost you to others, but don't sit and not reach out and seek a conversation to help you make decisions.
I really agree. It's good to do it early on. So if you're looking at a journal, before you spend loads of time adapting to that journal's kind of author guidelines and referencing system, it's really worth having those conversations early on. I've found colleagues at REF incredibly supportive and useful. I've got some that I'm working on with students at PGRs. One of the things to think about as well is when somebody's going to graduate and when are they going to lose their York St John email address. You know, for example, if it's a PhD student that's graduated and they're working somewhere else, because in order to be able to use these publishing agreements for open access processing charges, and sometimes with those, what happens is York St John doesn't have to pay the process charge, we just have to pay the VAT on it. But you have to have a York St John email address in order to be able to do that. So obviously the PhD student is the lead author, but if it's a journal that allows a different corresponding author, then I would make sure that one of you as supervisors with the York St John email address becomes the corresponding author in case the kind of results from the peer review process come after the PhD is like graduated and lost their York St John email address. So we had a complication with one of our PGRs where they also work in the NHS, and they'd put their NHS email address as the corresponding address, and we had to get it changed in order to be able to get the funding for open access.
Yeah. Thanks, Alison. And again, in terms of gathering information to make decisions on your own behalf in terms of publishing, Megan is a very approachable person, and you can meet her in person in the library or you can meet via MS Teams. And I think increasingly that there is that encouragement, as I said earlier, for us to be thinking about publishing in the highest cited journals possible for our discipline and for our particular output that we're looking at. We sit in panel A, so when it comes to the REF panel assessing our unit of assessment and our submission, York St John submission, on the right-hand side of the screen under the title panel A, these are the bullet points show the areas that they're highly likely to be looking at in terms of the quality assessment of the quality of output. So rigor, which you would expect, whether it's a quantitative piece or a qualitative piece, there should be absolute rigor in the process, the methodology, the process, and the presentation. So that's the design, method, execution, analysis. The piece, I know I'm stating the obvious, some of you might think, but that it must make a significant addition to the knowledge base and to the conceptual framework of your field, your discipline, the area that you work in. And that links nicely into the kind of significance of the research. So how significant is this research? The scale, the challenge, and the logistical difficulty posed by the research. And some research is much harder than others to pull together. One example would be a PhD student I know who's currently out in Cambodia, and they've faced multiple problems managing cross-cultural challenges and challenges around ethics, professional behaviours, etc. So sometimes the kind of logistical difficulties posed by our projects can be above and beyond. So that in itself is something that can form important data, important information in an output, for example. So a coherent argument, logical coherent argument, that it's a contribution to theory building in your profession, and that it's advances knowledge, skills, and understanding. And then it has applicability and significance to relevant service users and research users. Increasingly, I think everybody on this call will know that increasingly in the research landscape, there's a real movement around involving ordinary citizens, people with lived experience, in research. So having almost like a ground up approach, so that there's a collaborative approach to different kinds of research that's undertaken. And that particularly comes into play where it's qualitative, community facing, population facing, in-depth research. And then final bullet point, which again, unsurprisingly, would be that it's applicable for policy. You know, is there some applicability here for policy relevant to your profession or to end users of your research, so research users, service users. Output formats, as I alluded to earlier, the papers, absolutely, still there, papers. Monographs are long form outputs, monographs, chapters, books. And I know from Rob Mortimer and some other colleagues who've been publishing for a number of years that sometimes folks will start with what's called a journal in a quartile, a particular quartile, and surf through the journals to look at, so what are quartile 2 journals? I've just started out in my research journey. I'm just getting into publishing outputs. Have a look at journals that sit in quartile 2, but also look in quartile 1, and bear in mind that often we might get knocked back when we submit a paper for publication, because you need to get past the editorial part of the process and then move into the peer review part of the process. So there are a couple of kind of significant hurdles, and the submissions to acceptance rates for quartile 1 journals would be quite telling. And this is just an absolute example. It might only be 1% of submissions that are published. So it's quite a competitive field. So again, if you're not sure what that means to you, don't hesitate to seek out and find myself, Alison, or Owen. But don't be afraid to pitch for those higher rated journals in terms of, you know, the high citation journals that researchers are chasing, so that their profiles are being appropriately developed and that their work is having an impact, which is what the information on the side of the screen under the title panel A, it's what they're looking at. So other things that link to your outputs that's really, really important to think about, and that could be particularly important in mock refs, particularly, so that those who are in the kind of assessment group for a unit of assessment, where you're asked to rate, to do your own personal rating for your output, think about also adding in a short narrative. So once you've made that decision, your own kind of self-report grading, also have a think about for the notes section, does your piece have wider significance? So how is it impacting out there in the profession and the wider societal context? And it might not be that you wanted to cover that, But if you think it might be relevant, then state it, put it in the notes, because that's really useful information to have when people in the university is not the universe, in the university have some additional narrative that can help them understand and rate the paper. Is it a game changer piece of work? Are there international collaborators? And if there's many more than one things that I hope you take out of this meeting today, but definitely collaborating with colleagues from other parts of the globe, other countries, other universities in other countries. Please give yourself time to think about that and to build your network. And again, if you're not quite sure what, how, where, just speak to one of us, or bring it to another meeting that we offer for the unit of assessment. Well cited, well, citations obviously, and you can get your Google Scholar citations. You can keep track of them there. If you're it depends how much time you want to give to this, but you can do quite a bit of surfing to look at how many people viewed your article, for example, how many people have downloaded it, how many times it's been cited. So all of that provides a kind of a profile picture of your piece of work. And then reviews. If you've had if it's a chapter or a book, the kind of endorsements or reviews that you might have received. So in terms of the rating that REF does, they use a 4 scale, and they use from 1, which basically is unclassified, through 2, which is work that's recognized, through 3, which is work that's internationally excellent and it's original, significant, and then 4, which is world leading, and it has both originality and significance, and it's also rigorous. So they use that 4-part scale. The university, through the REF subcommittee, also developed a 9-point scale. And as a unit of assessment, we have to think about both of those. And you don't have to sit right now and worry about that. That's something that will play out as each mock REF happens annually. But the 9 points provides additional areas where you might think it's not quite a 3, it's an upper 2, or it's definitely a 3, potentially a 4. And what happens is that the unit of assessment assessors will assess it, you'll assess it, the unit will assess it, and then an external person will also assess it. So that's going to happen next year in terms of some externality to the process. So we've had a couple of runs through testing it out. So an average from all of those self-reported grading, the unit of assessment grading, and then the external grading gives the university a really helpful indicator of the quality of the outputs that it's got within its academic body. So I realise I've talked an awful lot. I'm really sorry about that. But remember, this is the starting point, and Alison, Owen and myself will definitely make sure that we've got some scheduled diary time across the year to meet, and at points maybe just to also meet more informally where there's conversation space. And for example, you might want to bring along a case study, or you might want to bring along a situation you've got around publishing, anything that you can bring along, and we can talk about it. So I'm going to stop now, and we've got just over 10 minutes for comment and questions. I'll stop sharing. And